If everyone who ever judged you only saw what you did and never once asked why, could you blame them for what they decided you were? Hold the question. Carry it with you while I tell you the rest, because the answer turns out to cost more than you'd expect, and I'd rather you weren't paying before you knew the price. Now let me show you a man in a gymnasium in Yoido on a Tuesday morning, the day he found out he was the villain of a story he had already read. The room smelled the way these rooms always smelled in the manhwa, which is to say the artist had clearly never been in one. Because in real life, it smelled like floor wax and ozone and the particular sweat of 40 grown adults trying not to look afraid. The light was that high fluorescent hum that flattens everyone's face. I was wearing a numbered bib. The number was 23. The name printed under the number was Kwon Taeyang. The body wearing the bib was mine, in the sense that I was the one currently driving it. Whether it was mine in any other sense was at that moment an open question. I was looking at a system window. The other hunters could not see it. The evaluator standing in front of me could not see it. It hung in the air in front of my face the way a piece of paper hangs in front of you when someone is making you read it. So I read it. Status Kwon Taeyang, Level 1, Class, Unassigned, Rank, E, Provisional, Unique Skill, Loanword Rank, Non-Combat Analyst, acquires a read-only copy of any witness skills system text and or a signature. And then at the bottom in a font, the system reserves for things it wants you to take seriously. The title, which read The Tyrant of Itaewon Gate, Passive. Tyrant's Ledger, Active. I closed the window. The evaluator was still talking. E rank, non-combat auxiliary class. Recommend assignment to a licensed crew in a low priority zone. Sign here, here, and here. Welcome to the registry, Hunter Kwon. He did not look up while he said it. The other hunters did not look up either. 40 people in a room, and not one of them was surprised. They had already decided what I was, and the system had agreed with them. And that particular page of the story had already been turning long before I walked in. Here's the part where I should explain. I had read this book every chapter. The manhwa was called Gate Sovereign, and it ran 287 chapters before the publisher pulled it for restructuring. And the scene I was standing in was the cold open of the first chapter. The villain receives his humiliating rank stamp, and the story begins. 3 years later, that villain, the one in my bib, the one with my number, would die in an alley in Mappo with a sword through his sternum. Courtesy of a regressor who came back in time to correct what he called the timeline. The regressor was the hero. His name was Yoon Sangcheol. I glanced at the observation gallery. He was already there, sharp-faced black hunter's jacket cut clean at the shoulders. Green eyes, scanning the test floor with the flat patience of a man who had already decided what was going to happen and was only waiting to see the order. Chapter 1 Cameo. He looks down at the rank test hall, sees the new villain register, and starts the list. My stomach did something uncomfortable, and I did not let it show on my face, because that body had a face that did not show things, and I had not yet earned the right to start changing it. I signed the form. I took the certification card. I put it in the inside pocket of a coat I had not picked out and walked toward the door, thinking, very calmly. The way you think when something is already on fire and you have decided to leave the building before screaming, that I was going to need a different plan than the one the page had drawn for me. I had not asked to be the villain, and I was not going to consent to the role by inertia. Itaewon in the first chapter of Gate Sovereign looks the way it looks now, which is to say it looks like a neighborhood the city has been politely losing for 3 years. The first gate opened over the Hamilton intersection in August. The second opened underneath an abandoned karaoke bar 6 weeks later. By the time the third one tore through a parking garage off the main strip, the district had been zoned as a permanent gate cluster, and the rent had collapsed, and the shutters had started rusting half down the way shutters do when nobody is sure whether tomorrow is worth opening for. I walked past a noodle shop that had been a noodle shop in the manhwa too, and the same old woman was sweeping the same step, and I thought, with that particular vertigo you get when fiction puts on its coat and walks past you in the street, that I was going to need to be careful about how often I let myself notice things like that. Gil-soo's shop, relics, supplies, a counter you couldn't see over, because the old man had stacked it with paperwork and stubbornness in equal measure. In the manhwa, he showed up in chapter 42 and sold the hero a knife and a piece of advice. In the timeline I was standing in, he had not yet met me, in the sense that the man who had been driving this body had also not yet met him. I logged the shop and walked past it. I went up onto a rooftop I knew was unlocked, because in chapter 11, a side character had used it to hide from a debt collector, sat on the low wall at the edge, and opened the skill panel to look at Loanword again. I want to be honest with you, I'm not the kind of person who, when handed a cheat skill in a survival environment, immediately goes out and tests it. I'm the kind of person who reads the manual, makes a list, and then sits on a wall for 40 minutes trying to talk himself into doing the thing the manual says will hurt. Below me on the street, a guild satellite office had a hunter outside doing a warm-up. F rank by the look of him drilling Aura Pulse, the cheapest combat skill on the registry. Pop and release, pop and release. I watched. Aura Pulse? F rank, acquired read-only. I checked the panel. The skill was there. Loanword had done what the system said it would do, so I tried to fire it. The feedback dropped me into a crouch behind the streetlight on the wall I had been sitting on. It was the kind of pain that comes from the inside of the bone, where you cannot reach it to apologize. I waited it out, counting seconds, breathing through my nose, because that's what you do when you don't want anyone 4 floors below to hear you. The count went to 19, and then it stopped, and I straightened up and I checked the panel again. The skill was still there, still read-only, still mine to fire if I wanted to do that again, which I did not. So, the skill worked, and it hurt. Both useful facts, both filed. I went into Gilsu's an hour later because I had decided that if I was going to test Loanword on something that mattered, I wanted a controlled environment. And a relic shop run by a former B rank with strong opinions about etiquette was the closest thing to controlled I was going to get in Itaewon. He recognized me, of course. He looked at me the way you look at a stray dog that has come into your kitchen and started doing the dishes. Kwon, you're not welcome here. I want to say that before you say anything else, so we're both clear. That's fair. I'd like to ask you a question, and then I'll leave. I'd also like to pay you for your time. You'd like to what? Pay you for your time. I have a question about Sovereign's Interrupt, and you're the only person in this district who's ever cast it. There was a silence in the shop that did the work of several pages of exposition. Gilsu took off his reading glasses. He set them on the counter. He looked at me the way a man looks at a sentence, in a language he used to speak fluently. You want to know about Sovereign's Interrupt? I want to know what the entry form looks like. Just the entry form. So I know what it looks like when a real hunter does it. Call it a safety demonstration. He stared at me for what felt like a very long while. I had bet, walking in, that an old man's pride in a skill he hadn't been allowed to cast publicly in 15 years would outweigh a relic dealer's hatred of a known thug. The bet was tight. He finally exhaled through his nose, came out from behind the counter, walked into the small open space between 2 shelves, and showed me the opening movements of the entry form. Sovereign's Interrupt, S rank, acquired, read-only, estimated aura cost at current reserve, 340%. Execution will cause significant physical trauma.
Right, that one stays in the box.
I thanked him. I paid him in full. I bought a protein bar from the counter because I had not eaten since waking up in someone else's body, and I left. And as the bell over the door rang behind me, Gilsu said something at my back that I'm not going to repeat to you because I owe him that much, and because he was, in the end, correct about the man who used to wear this coat. The Scraplot crew was not a crew anyone in Itaewon respected, including the Scraplot crew. There were 5 of them on the registry and 4 of them in the office that afternoon, and they were all there because the man whose body I was wearing had spent the better part of a year making sure none of them had anywhere else to go. The whiteboard had a number on it in red. That number was the dues each of them owed the crew leader, which is to say me, which is to say the original me, which is to say a debt that should never have existed. Oh, Minjae, D rank Aura Compress user, sat backward on his chair with his arms crossed on the backrest, watching me come in the door the way a man watches a dog he was bitten by once. Park Hyunwoo, F-rank scout, leaned against the wall, trying to look like he wasn't a kid. Lee Do-ha, D-rank tank, took up his corner, large and quiet, a man who in the Manhwa had never spoken a line, and in this office had not yet spoken to me either. And at the kettle, with her back half turned, was Shin Yujin, an E-rank healer, Pulsemen specialist, and the only person in 287 chapters of Gate Sovereign who had ever shown the original Kwon Taeyang the smallest courtesy on a side panel in chapter 48, by handing him a cup of water without looking at him. She turned around when I came in. She did not flinch. She did look at the floor for a second, which is its own kind of language, and then she looked back up. We have tea? Thank you. I sat down. I put the certification card on the table. I let it sit there for a beat, because I needed them to see it before I started. The dues are canceled. The whiteboard comes down, and splits are even from today. An equal share each, no leader cut. Nobody splits off alone on a gate, ever. I don't care what the loot looks like. If you want to leave, you can leave. The dues are still canceled, and there's no follow-up. That's the whole meeting. Any questions?
What?
The dues are canceled. Yeah, I heard the words. I'm asking what? He stood up. He didn't come toward me. He walked over to the whiteboard, and he looked at the red number, and he looked back at me. His face was not friendly. His face was, in fact, the face of a man who had decided several months ago that someday he was going to break the crew leader's nose, and who was now being told the crew leader had canceled the appointment without consulting him. This is a trick. It isn't. It is a trick. Everything you do is a trick. So which one is this? Minjae, it's not a trick. If it turns out to be a trick, you have my permission to break my nose. Write it down. Witnesses present. Minjae sat back down. He did not say anything else. Yujin set a cup of tea in front of me with the same matter-of-factness she had set the kettle on the burner, and she said quietly, Thank you for the split. I did not know how to receive it. The original Kwon Taeyang had a script for every kind of human interaction, except the kind in which somebody thanks you for doing something a decent person would have done in the first place. And the body I was wearing had to learn that script from scratch, on the spot, in front of 4 people who had a great deal of practice not believing me. I said you're welcome, and I sounded to my own ears, like a man reading a customer service prompt off a card. She didn't seem to mind. She went back to the kettle. Min-jae from his chair said, "We have a gate tomorrow. D-rank corridor, hollow type, the eastern edge of the district. You still want to lead it?"
I do.
Fine. That was in the manhwa, the moment an early chapter would have ended on a panel of his furious face. In real life, it ended on him drinking the last of his coffee and walking out without looking at me, which is a thing chapters cannot do but people can. The hollow corridor was a D-rank gate that produced a single boss monster called a vault crawler and a small swarm of lesser things whose entire purpose in the food chain was to make the vault crawler harder to kill. In Gate Sovereign, it was cleared in a half-page montage by a different crew. I had read that page. I knew the arm the vault crawler favored, the tile of the corridor floor that was structurally compromised, and the way the third small monster from the rear came in on a delay and broke formation from the left flank around the half-minute mark of engagement. I had a great deal of information. What I did not have was a body that had ever cast a single offensive skill above F rank. So I told them where to stand, and I let them do the work. Doha, hold the choke at the second pillar. Don't push past it. Hyunwoo, eyes on the left flank. Third monster from the rear breaks formation around the half minute. Call it before it moves. Yujin, you stay behind Doha. Do not advance. You advance over my body. Min-jae with me. We're going to take the vault crawler's right side and make it think we are an interesting problem. We're going to make it think, what? Just trust me for 90 seconds. When Min-jae fired Aura Compress, I let Loanword do its work. It is hard to describe what that feels like from the inside. The closest I can get is this. Imagine standing next to somebody at a piano and learning a chord by watching their fingers, and then immediately being asked to play the same chord on the same piano with their fingers still on the keys. The skill came in, the system chimed quietly under my breastbone. The Aura cost loaded twice. Once for him and once for me, and I fired the borrowed copy a heartbeat after his, at the vault crawler's right elbow joint, and the elbow joint went in the direction joints are not supposed to go. And then the feedback hit me.
Taeyang.
Cramp. It's a cramp. Keep working. Nobody believed me. Nobody stopped working. Doha held the choke. Hyunwoo called the left flank again on the next mark, and Min-jae, without being told, stepped into the space I had vacated and finished the vault crawler's right side. The gate cleared not long after. The green light went out, and Yujin had her hand on my shoulder before I had finished standing up, and she did not say anything about the cramp. Aura Compress. Permanent half copy acquired. Loanword's first graduation, a skill that was no longer read-only, a skill I could fire at single aura cost without making my own bones ring like struck glass. I checked the field clock. We had come in well under the time the manhwa had recorded for a different crew on a different page, which was either a compliment or a flare into the sky depending on who was looking up. We walked out of the corridor. Min-jae did not look at me. On the way to the van, he handed me a bottle of water without saying anything, and that man had never done such a thing for the original Kwon Taeyang on any page of any chapter. I drank it. I thanked him. He grunted, which given the source was a great deal more generous than it sounded. The Korean Hunter Association's analyst desk processed gate clear reports, the way insurance companies process claims, which is to say slowly, suspiciously, and with a strong preference for the version of events that was easiest to file. The hollow corridor clear time pinged a duty analyst's terminal in the early afternoon. It was flagged within minutes, routed to a senior reviewer not long after, and landed on Yoon Sangcheol's desk before the end of the shift, because Sangcheol had, in the days following the rank test, asked very politely to be CC'd on any anomalous clear time involving a hunter named Kwon Taeyang, and the duty analyst had no idea why a B-rank Iron Veil captain wanted that CC, but had no incentive to ask. He read the report, then he read it again. He did not move for what must have been a long time, and then he opened a calendar and he wrote, in a notation system only he used, an invitation. The message arrived in the early evening, 2 sentences. To a normal person, it was a courteous professional invitation from a respected senior captain to a junior hunter for a closed-room spar at the Iron Veil Training Hall, to be conducted at the junior hunter's earliest convenience, all expenses covered, witnesses limited to Iron Veil personnel for the junior hunter's privacy. To me, it was the opening move of a chapter of someone else's story. I read it twice, closed it, opened it again, typed a reply, and sent it inside the hour. Yes, tomorrow. Thank you. If you've been counting the rules in your head while I've been telling you this, you've already noticed the one I just broke. The original Kwon Taeyang would have refused the invitation. He would have refused it loudly. In the version of this story written on the page, he would have sent back a reply so insulting that Yoon Sangcheol would have used it as the predicate for the item with my name on it on his correction list. That refusal was the predicate of every page that came after, and I had just deleted it. I did not know if Sangcheol had read the original of that chapter. I did not know if he had read any of it. The manhwa had not, to my knowledge, existed inside its own world, but Sangcheol was a regressor. He had lived through this timeline twice. He knew what the original Kwon Taeyang would have done, and he was going to walk into the Iron Veil training hall tomorrow and find out that I had done something else. I'm going to lose the spar. I want you to know that going in, at present I have 1/2 copy of Aura Compress, a read-only Aura Pulse, a read-only Sovereign's Interrupt. I cannot fire without breaking my own arm, and a body that has never been in a fight with a B rank in its life. He is going to win cleanly, in front of his own people, on his own mat, and I am going to walk off the mat and bow and thank him for the match. And while he is winning, I'm going to take 4 of his skills. Yoon Sangcheol was waiting on the mat when I came in. He did not bow. He inclined his head, which is the kind of greeting B-rank captains give junior hunters they are about to do something to. I bowed fully because the original Kwon Taeyang would not have, and because I wanted Sangcheol to register the difference inside the first 2 seconds. You came. You invited me. I did, standard rule set. First, clean strike or yield. Aura skills permitted up to and including B rank. I will not use anything above B. You have my word. Thank you. We stepped onto the mat. He opened with Iron Veil's Step, a B-rank movement skill that converts a hunter's first stride into a several-meter blur. I had read about it in a much later chapter. I had not, until that moment, seen it cast. The system chimed under my breastbone, polite, almost embarrassed at the size of what it was filing. Iron Veil's Step, B-rank, acquired, read-only. He hit me in the ribs with the flat of his hand. It felt like being hit with a board. I went sideways across the mat, recovered, came back at the center line with my hands up and my weight low, and he was already there, because Iron Veil Step works the way it does. And his next strike was a Cutting Pulse, the B-rank aura projection that cuts at a distance. Cutting Pulse, B-rank, acquired, read-only. I took it on the forearm I was using to guard, which sounds dramatic. What it actually did was open a clean line through the sleeve of my shirt and the skin underneath, a cut about as deep as a paper cut and about 3 times as long. He was not trying to kill me, he was reading me, patient the way you read a contract, the way a man reads when he expects the small print to lie. I did not fire back. I want you to notice that detail, because the not firing was the entire shape of my plan. Keep the panel filling, refuse to escalate, let him hit me, move out of the worst of it, and cover the most dangerous angles without raising a single offensive skill. After 90 seconds of this, he changed tactics, and he stepped in with Aura Lash, which is an A-rank skill he had promised not to use. My apologies, reflex. Accepted. Aura Lash A-rank acquired, read-only. He had cast an A-rank skill in front of 3 Iron Veil witnesses on a B-rank rule set, a procedural violation. He would later file as a reflex and that nobody in the gallery would dispute, because he was Yoon Sangcheol. He had done it on purpose. To see whether I would react the way the original Kwon Taeyang would have reacted, which was to scream about the violation and lose the match in a tantrum and add insult to my own injury. Instead, I accepted the apology and kept my feet moving. He stepped in for a finishing strike, and what he opened with was not a B-rank skill. It was Sovereign's Pause, an S-rank field effect technique that briefly slows the target's perception of time, the way the bottom of a deep pool slows light. He had also promised not to use S-rank. The system chimed under my breastbone for the 4th time, and it chimed quietly, and it chimed apologetically. Sovereign's Pause, S-rank, acquired, read-only. He hit me in the sternum with the heel of his palm, in slowed time, and I went down on the mat, and the world went normal again, and he was standing over me with his hand still extended. Yield. I yield. I got up, bowed, thanked him for the match, and walked off the mat without looking up at the gallery. I went out through the side door of the training hall and into the corridor and leaned against the wall there for a long moment. Because my ribs were not in the configuration my ribs had been in when I walked in, and because I did not want anyone inside to see me lean against the wall. Sangcheol stayed on the mat. The gallery cleared. He sat down, eventually with his blade across his knees, alone in the hall. I'm going to do something I do not usually do, which is tell you something I cannot have known directly. I want you to understand that what I am about to describe is what I am. In retrospect, certain happened. A man who has read his own death coming does not accept a public spar. So either I had not read it, in which case I was harmless, or I had read it, in which case I had wanted him to know I was paying attention. He sat with that for a long time, in a training hall that had gone very quiet around him. And then he stood up, sheathed the blade, went back to his office, and opened the correction list. He did not cross my name off it, because that was not yet warranted. But for the first time in all the years he had been keeping the ledger, he wrote a question mark next to a name on it. She did not ask. She came over with the cloth and the bowl, and she sat down across from me, and she put her hand on my wrist and turned my forearm palm up and started cleaning the cut without saying anything about how the cut had got there. The cut had got there because a B-rank captain had wanted to see what I would do if he sliced me a little. The cut was already closing on its own, because the body I was wearing had a constitution stat the rest of me had not earned, but it still needed cleaning, and she still cleaned it.
Pulse Mend, D rank, acquired, read only.
I filed it under self-maintenance, and I'm aware of how that sounds. I'm aware of what it means to file a healer's skill acquired by watching a particular healer's hands at a particular distance under a particular lamp, under the heading of self-maintenance. I'm telling you what I told myself, which was that I was thinking about gate geometry, and I watched her push her hair behind her left ear with her wrist because her hands were busy. And I logged the detail, and I did not say anything, because there were a great many things that were more frightening to say than to simply prevent. Hold still. Sorry? It's fine. She finished, put the cloth in the bowl, and did not get up. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you sick? I had not expected the question. I considered for a moment whether to lie. I had been lying to 4 people since I sat down at their table, and the lying was working, in the sense that no one had broken my nose yet, but this was a different question. This was the question of a person who had decided in the last 5 minutes that something was wrong with me in a way she could possibly help, and was trying to find out which kind of wrong it was so she could pick the right kind of help. I'm not sick. All right. Thank you for asking. She didn't answer that. She just nodded. Once, the nod of someone who has decided not to believe you and decided in the same breath not to make you keep saying it. She got up, took the bowl to the sink, and did not look back at me. She left the office not long after, and I sat at the table with my forearm on the wood and the lamplight on the closed cut. And I thought about a chapter much later in Gate Sovereign, the one in which a D-rank gate at the eastern edge of Itaewon went unstable 40 minutes ahead of its scheduled window and killed 4 people, one of whom was a healer named Shin Yujin. I closed my eyes and I planned. Day 12, by my count, Min-jae brought the soju, sat down across from me without asking, poured both glasses, drank his, and poured himself another. 6 months ago, Min-jae said. I remember it, I told him. B-rank gate, the one in Mappo. You sent me in alone on the left flank because you wanted the loot from the side chamber, and you knew the side chamber was where the second wave came in. I lost the use of my left hand for 2 months. I couldn't pay my sister's tuition that quarter. She had to take a semester off. She still hasn't gone back. I know she hasn't, I said. You know, he said, and that's the whole of it. That's the entire apology. It isn't an apology, I told him. What I did is on the ledger in my own handwriting, and I'm not going to stand here and make it sound smaller than it was. You can walk out that door tonight. The dues are gone. They should never have been collected. Nobody follows you. The only thing I've got to set against any of it is what I do from here. And I know that doesn't come close to even. He stared at me a long moment, then poured a third glass he didn't drink. No, he said, it doesn't. Then, quietly, I don't trust you. You shouldn't, I said, not for a while. I'm not going to, for a long time. I'd think less of you if you did. I'm staying anyway, he said, and don't make a thing of it. It isn't forgiveness. If I walk, somebody greener takes my chair, and whatever you've got lined up next gets done to them instead of me, I'd rather be the one sitting here when it comes. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me since I got here. I said, don't thank me for it. He drank the third glass, left the bottle, and went home. I sat at the table until 2 in the morning and I did not pour anything for myself because the body I was wearing had a liver that had taken a beating I had not personally administered, and I was not going to add to the ledger. The gate from that later chapter went unstable in the late afternoon, 40 minutes ahead of its scheduled window, exactly when the manhwa said it would. I had the crew on site early, Yujin behind Doha not long after, and the formation locked well before the field flickered. When the boundary went, the kind of wrong that does not show up on the schedule, what came out of it was the kind of thing a D-rank gate is not supposed to produce, and we held the line for the long handful of minutes it took to push the spawn back into the field and stabilize the boundary. Hyun-woo took a hit to the shoulder that opened him from collarbone to bicep, and Yujin was on him before the cut had finished closing. I fired Pulse Mend, half-cost, offhand, on the cut where her hand was already working. It closed faster than it should have. She looked at me. That was you, she said. It was, I said. When did you learn that? Recently? We're going to talk about that. I know. She went back to Hyun-woo. The boundary held, and the field calmed not long after. He did not say anything. He stood at the edge of the gate field for a full minute, looking at the things that were supposed to be different and counting them. There were a lot of them. The correction list in his pocket had that afternoon become inaccurate in a way that mattered. He turned around. He went back to his car. He did not approach me. Not yet. He waited for me in an alley between the gate site and the parking lot. He did not draw the blade. He had his hands in his coat pockets. When I came around the corner, he straightened up, and he looked at me the way you look at a problem you have been carrying in your pocket for years and would like finally to put down. How? He said.
How? What?
How did you know the gate would go unstable 40 minutes early? I read it somewhere, I said. Where? In a book.
What book?
I told him. I did not give him the whole shape of it. I gave him enough. The Manhwa, the long serialization, the alley in Mappo where the villain dies, the regressor, who is the hero, the regression that begins on a Tuesday in March, and the correction list with my name partway down it. He listened without moving. He did not ask me to prove it, and he did not need to, because he had grieved 2 timelines and he recognized the shape of the third. I've gone back twice, he said. I know. The first time I tried to save everyone, it did not work. The second time I tried to fix the ones I could reach, it worked better. There are still names on the list. You are partway down it because the timeline in which Kwon Taeyang lives is a timeline in which a great many other people do not. I understand that. Then you understand what I'm going to have to do? I understand what you think you have to do. I want to offer you a different reading. Go ahead. Your correction list killed people on the page where Yoojin died, and 3 others I could name. I changed the gate timeline today because I knew what was supposed to happen, and I did not want it to happen. You are the hero of this story. I'm trying not to be the villain. That is the whole plan. If you want to fight about it, I have 4 of your skills, and I have been waiting for you to come find me. 4? Iron Veil Step, Cutting Pulse, Aura Lash, Sovereign's Pause. That is not possible. It is actually Loanword read-only on first acquisition, half copy on graduation. None of those 4 have graduated, so I cannot fire them at full strength. I can fire each of them once before the feedback takes me out of the fight. I will fire all 4 at you if you draw. He drew. He chose the location. I agreed to it. It was a closed lot owned by a friend of his who would not ask questions. We had it for an hour. We did not need an hour. I lost. I want to be clear about that. I lost the fight in the technical sense from the opening exchange. He was faster, he was stronger, and he had done this before. In 2 earlier timelines, he had killed the man whose body I was wearing on 2 different occasions, and his body knew the shape of the fight before his mind did. I fired Iron Veil. Step on the opening exchange and close the distance and hit him in the ribs with the borrowed skill, and the feedback took my left side and I went down. I got back up, fired Cutting Pulse from 6 meters, and he stepped through it without breaking stride. The feedback opened a line in my own forearm that the borrowed skill had been meant to open in him. I got back up and fired Aura Lash. He blocked it on the blade, and the feedback dropped me to 1 knee. I got back up and fired Sovereign's Pause, and the world went slow, and I stepped sideways out of his guard and hit him in the kidney with the half copy of Aura Compress I had earned the honest way. And he staggered, and the world came back to normal speed, and I went down on the gravel, and I did not get back up immediately. He stood over me. He was bleeding from the kidney, and he was not seriously hurt. He had been informed, which was the part that mattered. Last move. Yes. He raised the blade for the finishing technique he had used in the final chapter, the one I had read, the one that had killed the man whose body I was wearing the first time the story tried to end. I knew the entry form. I had watched it in 2 timelines I had not lived through. The first 3 movements I had only as text, the last as silhouette. It did not matter. I knew what was coming. I fired Sovereign's Interrupt. The feedback ripped my right arm apart from the elbow down. I felt the bones go in a sequence, and the meat around them give and the gravel under my face when I hit it. The interrupt fired anyway, because the cost had been paid in full at the point of release, and the cost had been my right arm. The finishing technique did not finish. It stopped in the middle, the way a sentence stops when the speaker has lost the thread. He stood over me with the blade halfway through a strike that was no longer going anywhere. Title updated provisional, the rewritten one? He looked at the notification. He looked at me on the gravel. He looked at the title above my name, which had 10 seconds ago said the Tyrant of Itaewon Gate, and which now said something else. He sheathed the blade. He did not say anything for what felt like a long while. He crouched down, looked at my right arm, which was not in a configuration arms are supposed to be in, took his belt off and tied it above my elbow as a tourniquet, picked me up, and carried me out of the scrapyard. He drove me to a private clinic Iron Veil kept for situations the KHA was not supposed to know about. And he sat in the corridor outside the operating room for the next several hours, while a healer he trusted put my arm back together. When I woke up, he was still there. He was reading a paperback. He looked up. 2 predictions, he said. The gate going early, the kidney shot. Yes. Give me 2 more. The Itaewon B rank break activates at the Lodestone complex on a day I will give you in writing, in the early morning hour. The Sentinel has a magnetic inversion window that opens for a few seconds when it is hit by a sub-D rank aura compress on the central node. The window is the only way to kill it. How do you trigger a sub-D aura compress at the central node without dying? You walk forward? He looked at me for a long time. He folded the corner of his paper back. He closed it. I'm not going to cross your name off the list. I'm going to put a different mark next to it, and I want you to know what the mark means. It means I'm going to verify your 2 predictions, and if they verify, I'm going to close the list. Not because I have decided you're not a threat, but because I have decided that the threat is the wrong frame. Understood. I'm going to show up on the day. I'll be there. Get well, Kwon.
Thank you.
He went home. I went back to sleep. The body I was wearing slept for 16 hours, and when I woke up, Min-jae was in the chair by the bed reading a gate schedule, and Yoojin was in the doorway with a cup of tea. And Do-ha was outside the door doing pull-ups on the quarter pipe, like a man who had decided that hospitals were boring. And Hyunwoo had brought me a pear? Because Hyunwoo was 21, and that was what 21-year-olds had decided to do? You broke your arm, Min-jae said. I did. On purpose? To stop a finishing strike? Yes. I have decided you are a different person. I do not know why. I'm staying.
I'm glad, I said. Eat the pear.
Yes, chef. I ate the pear. Yoojin set the tea down on the bedside table, put her hand on my left wrist, briefly did not say anything, and went out. Min-jae went back to the gate schedule. Do-ha did another set of pull-ups. The light through the window was the gray of a morning that had finally committed. The lodestone sentinel activated on the hour, which was the hour I had given Sangcheol 8 days earlier in a clinic corridor, while a healer he trusted was sewing my arm back together. He had verified the first prediction and the second, closed the correction list 2 days before, and not told me, and I had not asked. We walked into the complex in 2 columns, Scraplot on the left and Ironveil on the right, and the sentinel came down off its mounting in the central chamber with a sound like a girder collapsing. And the magnetic field came up around it, and the fight began. I called the patterns, Sangcheol carried the damage, the sentinel had 4 attack types, and I had read all of them. Do-ha held the left flank, the senior Ironveil hunter held the right. Hyunwoo called timings on a steady rhythm, and Yoojin held the rear and kept Min-jae's aura compress reserve topped up with a sustain skill she had learned in the week of recovery, and I'm not going to tell you the name of it, because she had earned it without help, and the name was hers. At the 8-minute mark, the sentinel went into the 3rd phase of its attack pattern, and the magnetic inversion window opened, and we had a few seconds. You can't. I'm the only one here rated E. If it goes wrong, the KHA loses the least. That is the worst joke you have ever made. I know. I walked forward. I fired the half copy of Aura Compress, sub-D power, single aura cost, at the central node of the sentinel's chest plate. The inversion window opened. The sentinel's magnetic slam, which had been pulled to the center of the chamber by the field, released against the nearest mass, which was me. I went sideways into the wall hard enough to feel the wall through my back teeth. The window stayed open. Sangcheol stepped into it and finished the sentinel with the technique he had used in the final chapter, the technique I had once broken my arm to interrupt, and the sentinel came apart along its central seam and folded down onto the floor of the chamber in a long, slow collapse that sounded like a building agreeing to lie down. I lay against the wall in no hurry to stand. Someone said my name. It was Yoojin, already crossing the chamber with the small bowl and the cloth, because she had brought the small bowl and the cloth into a B-rank gate clear, because she had been planning for me to be against a wall. Itaewon Gate Complex, cleared, first completion in over 3 years. Crew Scraplot lead Kwon Taeyang. E-rank assist Ironveil Yoon Sangcheol. B-rank gate stability, permanent seal achieved. I will need a full report. She walked past me. Halfway across the chamber she stopped. She did not turn around. Good work. She kept walking. Min-jae sat down next to me against the wall and did not say anything. Yoojin knelt in front of me with the cloth and cleaned the dust off my face with the same matter-of-factness she applied to everything, and I closed my eyes and let her, and for the first time since I had woken up in that rank test hall on a Tuesday morning in March, I was not running calculations. KHA review the next morning. The body I was wearing had a new card, D-rank certification, with a provisional class designation in the small print that said Loanword Sovereign, which I'm told is not a class designation the registry has ever issued before. Gilsoo was yelling at me about the bloodstains on the old card which I had brought to him for repair on Min-jae's advice, and which had been, Gilsoo informed me at considerable length, beyond his ability to clean. Min-jae was at the back table with the next gate schedule. Park Hyunwoo was reading a comic. Do-ha was eating a tangerine, slowly in his corner. Yoojin was at the kettle. I opened the status window one last time. I want you to see what I saw. Status Kwon Taeyang, level 12. Class Loanword, Sovereign, Provisional, Rank, D, Unique Skill, Loanword, S rank by Acquisition Value, Non-Combat Analyst. Skills acquired, a growing handful, some permanent half copies, more still read-only. Title, the rewritten one, Provisional. I closed the window. The page in front of me was empty for the first time since I had opened my eyes in that gymnasium, and emptiness, after the kind of pages I had been reading, was the kindest weather a morning could offer. Good. A reputation is a kind of weather a neighborhood carries with it, the cold front a name moves under for years after the storm that earned it. The man whose body I was wearing had been a cold front for a long while, and the people who flinched when they heard his name had not been wrong to flinch. The work, then, was not arguing. The work was patience. The work was being, every morning, a slightly different kind of weather, until one ordinary Tuesday, somebody on this block said the name Kwon Taeyang to somebody else. And the second person did not flinch, and neither of them noticed the not flinching, because that is what changed weather feels like from inside it. I drank the tea Yujin had poured. It was hot, and it was good, and I did not say a word about the chapter that had almost killed her. Some things you keep? The way you keep a fire alarm in a drawer, out of sight, in good repair, ready if the smoke ever comes back. That is the end of the first part of this story. There is more of it, and there will be more after that, and somewhere down the line there will be a page I have not yet read. I'm looking forward to it. The page is blank for the first time in a long while, and I have a pen, and a steady hand, and a crew that will tell me when the ink is wrong. If you stayed with me to the end of this one, thank you. Subscribe to Manhwa Forge so the next story finds you, and tell me in the comments, if you woke up tomorrow inside the villain's chapter of a book you'd already read, what would be the first thing you'd change? I'll read every answer. See you in the next gate.